All right. Doing well so far.
Do you have to reset your timer?
Yes, I have the free account, and the free account only has 40 minutes. So I have 2 other accounts that aren't free, but they're associated with other institutions, so I don't use theirs for. All right, we're doing well, people. Okay, I think we're getting close. Oh, here's Liesel. I think whoever's teaching should probably get started, and I'm going to mute all the rest of you. But if you want to talk, turn yourself back on.
Okay, so am I on or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, you are.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I got a text from a patient right as the other meeting was ending. So, okay, so Liz and I are doing 4 weeks on the book of Ruth, one of 2 books in the Bible to be named after a woman. I will be covering chapter 1 today. We'll kind of divide it up week by week. John Jackson gave us a great intro last week. I will definitely put out a disclaimer that I don't have any seminary education or anything like that. I do have a bit of a background in English literature, but the older I get, the more cautious I feel about trying to teach. I think when I was younger, I would have just charged right in. And now I realize all the technical difficulties dealing with something that's not in the original language and from a totally different time period. So all that's to say, jump in, correct me. It won't hurt my feelings. Don't let me say anything really off track if any of you know that that's not the way it would have read in Hebrew. Another point that I would just make about the book of Ruth, you know, it is a narrative, so there's a story there, but Old Testament narrative tends to be very, very spare. We get the facts. There's a lot of room in between where we might feel the need now to fill in motivations or past history or things like that. And we just don't have a lot of that in the book of Ruth. So there are lots of times when we can sort of speculate on why something happened or exactly what something meant when a character says it. But of course, we can't prove that. And I did become aware too, as I was trying to prepare for this, that there's lots of wordplay, particularly in this book, which of course, most of that is going to kind of go over my head. And so the Hebrew scholars will need to speak up if they see something like that. But let's go ahead and start with chapter 1. And I'm going to ask somebody to read verses 1 through 14, which kind of sets up the situation that our characters find themselves in. Does somebody want to read that?
I'd be happy to.
Thanks.
In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife, Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem and Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other, Ruth. When they had lived there about 2 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you in your house of your husband." And then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." And then they wept again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. So the main situation which drives the plot, which gets the plot started here, is famine. Famine drives a family of Ephrathites, which is probably a family in Bethlehem, from Bethlehem into the country of Moab. Ironically, of course, Bethlehem is the house of bread, but there is no bread, there is no food there due to some type of agricultural disaster. And so this family, which we don't know very much about them, but this family leaves to go and find food. Of course, there are other instances in the Bible of famine driving people to leave Israel and go somewhere else, and something good can come of that, particularly Jacob going down into Egypt after Joseph has already been there. So there might be people reading or hearing this story might think, the famine device or something like that. Be aware that something important is going to happen. The names of the family may be symbolic. Some people have suggested that they are so fitting with what happens to the characters that this is more like a fairy tale or a fable kind of story. Elimelech means my God is king. Naomi is my fair one or pleasant one. And of course, there's going to be a play on her name later. But the 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, means sickness and pining away, which doesn't seem like a name that you would deliberately give your child. So I don't know if that was their nickname or I don't know. But that's just an interesting point there. Now, where does this family go? They go to Moab. And Moab, of course, is a country which is east of the Dead Sea. And the people there are descendants of Lot. Does anybody remember how these people come about? What happens?
You can tell us.
Okay. Okay. Remember that Lot lived in Sodom, and 2 angels came to him and told him to get out, get his family and get out of the town before it was destroyed by fire and brimstone from heaven. And Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters are the only ones who leave the town, even though he tries to get the fiancés of his daughters to go with them, but they think he's joking. So it's just this one family. And then Lot's wife looks back and turns into a pillar of salt. So that leaves Lot and his 2 daughters, who flee to a nearby town or some nearby town. And according to Genesis 19:30 through 38, the daughters take matters into their own hands, say there's nobody who will marry us, and they get their father drunk and sleep with him. And the older daughter has a son named Moab, which she calls Moab, and the descendant, or these Moab is, the Moabites are the descendants of this person. So that's not a great ancestor to have, or at least seems a little odd to us. The people of Moab in Deuteronomy 23:4 are not to be admitted to the assembly of Yahweh, along with some other people who have different conditions. There's also a prohibition against marrying Moabite women in Numbers 22, or that's still around in, no, that's in Numbers 22, where around the time that Balak hires Balaam to try to curse Israel. And we have that story about Balaam's donkey, and which those of us who were a part of the Donkey Tales musical will remember. Mom, I know you can't speak, but if you're out there. So anyway, Moab is a neighbor, but it may not be the best place to go in terms of people following Yahweh. It is entirely plausible, though, that even though it's kind of close, that it has a different climate, and so there might have been food there. So that is where they go. And this family suffers once they get to Moab. There's already been the famine, forced migration, presumably leaving their land in Israel. And then when they finally get to Moab, even though they presumably have food, there's the death of Elimelech. And then there's the line about the family settled there 10 years. So of course we don't know exactly whether the sons married Orpah and Ruth immediately upon getting there, but if they did, then we're looking at these marriages, but still 10 years without any children. So famine, sickness and death, and then sterility, barrenness. So it's not a good situation altogether. But, none of this is definitely attributed to Yahweh either. And for example, Job has the prologue about Satan coming and to the assembly and asking God to try Job. There's not any explanation like that at this point. Nowhere does it say that these people were sinning so badly that they needed to be punished in any way. It just happens, at least according to our narrative. Some Jewish commentators particularly have thought that the sons may have died because they took Moabite women to be their wives. But Naomi clearly loves her daughters and mentions specifically that they dealt well, they dealt kindly with their husbands and the family. So I'm not sure that you can support that. Does anybody have any comments on the situation setting things up? Okay, well, just jump in and raise your hand or yell when you do.
Ted Thomas has a comment.
Oh, okay, John.
You have to
anything evil to the family or to God. In the 13th verse, Naomi says, "The hand of the Lord has been hard against me." So she attributes it to God.
That's right.
She's a female counterpart to Job, except Job had no idea what was going on. But he felt like God had, Job also says, God has allowed this to happen.
But the narrative question is going to be, is Naomi's attribution correct or not? I mean, that's
Right.
always the...
There's a big difference. Naomi's got the two daughter-in-laws who are kind to her. Job had his wife who doesn't come across very well at all in Job. She may be his greatest affliction. I don't know.
That's true, Ted. Thanks for bringing that up. I will take refuge in what John Jackson says, that Naomi attributes her misfortunes to God, but you still are left a little bit with the question: is that right, or is this just something bad that happened to good people? Which I sort of tend towards that explanation. Liz, were you trying to say something?
No, I wasn't. I was just trying to see if I was muted.
Okay. Okay. And then in verse 6, Naomi hears that Yahweh has visited his people and given them food. I think when John Banks read this, there was a different word there. What was that word, John?
Considered.
Mm-hmm.
Considered his people.
Okay. So this is one of two instances in the book where the narrator, I guess I would say, definitely attributes action to God. There's this one where Yahweh at some point reverses the famine, and also in 4:16, after Ruth and Boaz marry, Yahweh makes Ruth conceive. And those are two actions which are specifically attributed to God by the narrator. One of the complaints about the book of Ruth, well, I don't know if you call it a complaint, but one thing that some scholars have raised is that they don't see the hand of God in this very much. In the book of Esther, God, the name of God is not mentioned directly at all. And in this story, God, again, is not very often directly referenced as causing something, as intervening. But I think that this is, sort of the point of this whole book, which is that this book is going to talk about what happens when people follow the laws that God has set out for them, when people do hesed to one another. Am I pronouncing that correctly, John?
You got to go to the throat and say chesed. Chesed, it's a guttural letter.
Faithfulness.
Meg, can I say something? I was looking at that again, 13, and I don't know that that's the narrator's point of view, that the hand of the Lord is turned against me. I think that's Naomi looking over her life and trying to find an explanation for what's happened to her. And we can certainly see that when she renames herself. That doesn't come from anybody else but herself. And so I think it's a real indication of her inner sense of being and where she is at. And that idea, I must have done something wrong, God must be punishing me, is very pervasive at this time as well. So.
Yes, thanks. I think John Jackson still has a point there. That is definitely what Naomi believes. Is that really the case, is the question. And
Lisa, the point that Meg had been making, though, was about verse 6.
Oh,
That
okay.
heard that the Lord had visited. Now, whether the narrator thinks the Lord had visited or whether the people in Bethlehem told Naomi that they thought the Lord had visited. I mean, you could make an argument about verse 6, but that was the verse she was looking at.
I am, yeah. Or the fact that the famine is gone, and that, you know, people would interpret that as God's favor on the land. So.
Yeah, when they go out, Naomi has everything. The 2 sons and the husband, and Bethlehem has nothing. And when she comes back, Naomi has nothing. She's lost her husband. She's lost her status. She's lost everything. And Bethlehem now has everything. And I read a commentary that said that you should consider Naomi Israel, and Ruth as these Israelites coming back with their foreign wives.
So does that put Ruth in a good light then, or that particular?
No, the foreign wives were told to leave.
Okay. Well, yeah, thanks for the comments. I don't know that we can settle a question definitely, but the why of all this is something to think about, whether or not we can figure it out. And we all know that when bad things happen, even though good things may happen to us later, that doesn't mean that you cease to grieve for some of the bad things, for many of the bad things. So I'll kind of table that for right now. But let's get into the idea of chesed. Chesed. Let's see. In verse 8, my translation has Naomi asking or saying, may the Lord deal kindly with you, my daughters, as you've dealt kindly with the dead and with me. And that word there is chesed, which is supposed to, is a word apparently which is in Hebrew, but there's not any one word for it in English. So we have steadfast love is how that word is rendered lots of times. And Exodus 34 at the giving of the 10 Commandments. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love for the 1,000th generation. Chesed is loyalty, reliability, kindness, compassion. It's going above and beyond just strict duty as somebody has a responsibility to another person. As God does this for Israel, Ruth is going to do this for Naomi, and Boaz is going to do this for both of the women. This is also the word that in Micah 6:8, what does the Lord require of thee but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with thy God. The word mercy there is also this word chesed. So, you know, when Ruth and Orpah decide to, are standing there in the road, presumably with Naomi, and Naomi tells them to go back, Orpah does go back. And a lot of people have made the point that that doesn't necessarily mean that Orpah is a bad person. She has fulfilled her obligation to Naomi. And there's not really blame attached to her if she goes back to her own people and her own gods. But the person of Orpah is like a foil to show how much better Ruth is. Ruth clings to Naomi. Ruth will Ruth will not leave her. Ruth goes above and beyond her duty and her loyalty to Naomi, and she will be rewarded for that. Ruth is a beautiful illustration. The whole book of Ruth is a beautiful illustration of what happens when people obey God's laws, to care for each other and to show chesed to one another. And I think that's the main point of the whole book. John talked about different places where the book is placed in the canon. And of course, in our Protestant Bibles, we have it at the end of Judges. And if you remember the last words of the book of Judges, in those days, there was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes. And of course, Judges ends with the terrible stories, just complete anarchy almost in Israel. And by placing Ruth after that ending, there is it's like the example that shows that not everybody did the wrong thing. Here's a group of people who lived according to God's laws, and people were protected and cared for. The family was preserved, and they were blessed by God. Does anybody want to make any comments about chesed?
You could almost say that the first evidence of Hesed is Naomi's speaking truth to her own disadvantage and telling her daughters-in-law to go back.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's really, from her standpoint, there's really no hope for her. And she doesn't want her daughters-in-law to share that. That seems to me to be perhaps the first evidence of a deep-rooted faithfulness toward them.
Yes. Pardon? Okay. Okay. Well, let's keep thinking about that idea and bringing that up as we read the rest of the chapter here. I'm going to read verses 15 through 18, which is Ruth's proclamation to Naomi, and she actually swears an oath. So Naomi said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, even if death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to Ruth. So this is something that I think sounds better in the King James. "Entreat me not to leave thee or to turn back from following thee." Beautiful poetry. But and interestingly, in our culture, these words are often read or sung at weddings, describing a woman's commitment to her husband and to join into his family. But here they express Ruth's complete determination to stick with Naomi until the end and even after. The part about may the Lord do thus and so to me and more as well, apparently in swearing an oath, Ruth might have mentioned actual bad things that might happen to her, and the author here has sort of chosen not to even say those things in case they come true. But
Meg,
yes,
I heard a different explanation from my Hebrew teacher.
uh-huh.
He said, you don't want to give God any ideas. You just don't say anything, just say thus and so. And, don't give God any ideas.
Okay, well, that's a good strategy.
Well, Meg,
Mm-hmm.
I saw that the only other time that was used in the Bible is Jonathan to David.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Hey, Meg, I have a question that I'd like to ask John. I noticed in the NRSV that this response by Ruth is put in poetry. Is this Hebrew poetry or as opposed to prose?
Is there such a thing as Hebrew poetry? I mean, it's a judgment call.
So.
There's a continuum of language. And so what is defined as poetry and what is defined as prose? But this is one of those things where you have these phrases that line up in the way poetry would. So the editors of the Hebrew text or modern Hebrew text have chosen not to treat it like poetry, but it reads really those clipped parallel lines. I mean, Hebrew loves to have what we call verbless clauses where you don't have a verb. And so where you lodge, I will lodge, those are verbs, but then it's your people, my people, your God, my God. There's no verb there, but they line up in that kind of poetic cadence.
I'd like to just jump in here and say we have just under 9 minutes left.
Okay. Ted, did you have a comment?
The parallelism makes it look like poetry to me.
Mm-hmm. And certainly it would make sense to have this stand out because this is the climax of the first chapter, clearly, and again, maybe the whole book, where Ruth casts her lot in with Naomi, with Israel, and with Yahweh. And she swears by Yahweh in this, may the Lord do this and so to me and more as well. But she does mention the name of Yahweh, this woman from Moab who's supposed to be the foreigner and out of the land of Israel or out of the family of Israel. And the big question for me is, why does she do this? I keep thinking that she must have seen something in this family that she married into that caused her to, despite the fact that she has no monetary security and maybe not even any hope of marrying again and having children, she's seen something in this family that causes her to want to throw her lot in with Yahweh. And her commitment is total. Of course, Jewish authorities considered, or Jewish commentators considered Ruth the ideal proselyte to the Jewish religion. And we don't try to get people to become Jews anymore, but we do try to lead people to Christ. And I wonder, how often do we live our lives in such a way that people say, I want to be with that person. I don't even understand all the theology. I don't know all the implications, but I want to be with those people and do what they do and live the way they live. I was reminded of a sermon that Heather Holland preached many years ago at Hopwood. And I believe the title of it was "You Got to Get in the Boat." But does anybody remember that sermon? Roughly, you can raise your hand if you did. Yeah, okay. She told a story about her own family when they were picnicking near a dam and had taken a boat out there and suddenly realized that the dam was getting ready to open up the spillway and flood where they were. And I don't remember all the details, but the main thrust of it was, you got to get in the boat. We can't just sit here and drown. We got to get in the boat and try to get away from this water. And it was a total commitment. There was no, maybe we can sit here a little while, wait and see if the water's going to overwhelm us. It was, you got to get in the boat. And she repeated that over and over again. And I just think it would be wonderful if we could live in such a way that we make people want to get into the boat. It would be wonderful if we had people who were so determined to follow Christ. I feel like sometimes we go after people and are trying to make a lot of intellectual arguments to them, and we want people to stand up and make a sort of an intellectual confession of faith and be baptized. I'm not against any of that, but a number of people come to that sort of reluctantly, scared of hell. And this is somebody who sees the positive side of following Yahweh. Anybody got any comments on that in the less than 5 minutes we have left?
Meg, it strikes me that the reason why Ruth follows Naomi is not because, at least in the story here, is not that Naomi is demonstrating some great commitment to Yahweh. In fact, in the verses that follow that you haven't read yet, she actually kind of blames Yahweh. She's quite bitter about Yahweh. I think it's got to do with the fact that she is committed herself to her daughters-in-law. She's the character that's being drawn is a character of an amazingly open, sensitive, caring woman, and her daughters-in-law respond to that. And you know, Orpah originally also wanted to follow her, and she pleads with her not to for her own good. And so I think rather than kind of trying to theologize it, this is really a story of just a wonderful character who's been beaten down, and yet Ruth sees in her somebody that has reached out to her. That's the way I would read it.
Well, I think we're in agreement here, and maybe I'm not presenting my case well. I know that Naomi is bitter. I mean, that's going to be the end of the chapter. Don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara. I'm bitter. The Lord has dealt bitterly with me. But I do think in the 10 years or so, or however long that Ruth has known this family, I think she must have seen chesed being done in the family to make her want to follow Ruth, make her want to follow Naomi.
Meg, it seems to me that the sort of the idea that you're presenting about people who are with Christians and see how they live and want to be a part of that implies that we have to have interactions with other people, which has, of course, become even more difficult in these days. But it does suggest that it is going to be hard for us to bring any influence to bear on other people if we are standoffish and antisocial and too insulated.
Yes, I would agree with that completely. Okay, well, verses 19 through 22, I know we've got less than a minute, but that is the verses which describe Naomi renaming herself. Don't call me the pleasant one or the fair one anymore. Call me Mara. God has dealt bitterly with me. And some people, you can see this as despair, utter despair, but other people argue that the fact that Naomi is even blaming God in this or attributing her misfortune to God shows her faithfulness. She's going to argue with God. This is not the way God is supposed to act towards his people, and she's reminding him of that. So that may be a evidence of her continued faith. Thanks, everybody. I know we're just about to run out of time here, but I really appreciate the comments. And Liz will be doing this next week.
Thank you, Meg. That was great.
Thanks so much, Meg.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Story.
Y'all have a good week.
Same to you.
Too.